And I'm now going to be joined by Nick Buckley. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for joining us this morning. Good to have you with us. I don't want to say too much about this, Nick. I want to leave it in your hands because having watched the summing up yesterday by Mr. Justice Goose, I'm so devastated by what was said there. And obviously that my pain is nothing compared to the victims of this tragedy. But where would you like to start on this, Nick?
It's a huge issue, isn't it? I mean, we could spend the next 5 hours talking about this, from the beginning of what happened to, the allegations of a cover-up, to who was involved, who knew what, how did he get a knife? Is that Amazon's fault? Is this to do with immigration?
Right.
How do we punish? I mean, it just would just go on and on and on. Let's take this from a different angle, shall we? So the first thing is, every society has nutcases and lunatics. Some societies have more than others, that must be said. And this guy is obviously a nutcase to do what he did. How do we deal with that in this society? Because at the moment, all we're talking about, all the elite are talking about, and the government's talking about, are things like social media, talking about, he bought a knife off Amazon. Well, come to my house. I've got 7 huge sharp knives in my fucking drawer.
Pages actually calling him the Amazon killer. Of course, this is the murder of 3 little girls, Elsie, Dot, Alice, BB. And there is, as you say, it's a huge, where to start? But the focus on social media is interesting. And then Mersey police, of course, put out their statement yesterday after Axel Ruda was convicted, 52 years, but because he was 17, not quite 18, there's some lenience there in terms of his sentencing. Merseyside police put out a statement. I feel we're still being handled by the state, Nick. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. We've been handled by the state for decades, but when this atrocity happened, they went into overdrive. Right. Because this atrocity, I mean, we think it was horrendous, but the government thought it was even worse because they thought this was going to bring them down. That's why they overreacted. That's why we have political prisoners in our country now, because the government looked at what was going on in the streets, and we had idiots on the streets throwing bricks at the police, trying to set fires to hotels. I'm against all that, but the government looked at that and went, this could bring us down here. We need to come down with an iron glove and make sure these white working class scum know their place and they better get off the street. So we're going to punish every single one of them. And one, a 54-year-old woman got sent to jail, but she was up for parole a couple of weeks ago, and she was denied parole because this punishment beating, and that's what this is for the white working class. It's a punishment beating. You will know your place in this country or else.
There is a sense of that. There definitely is. And the thing is, what the Mersey police were saying was that the parents had asked that information pertaining to the injuries of their daughters was not put on social media, was not being discussed. Now, there's one side of us, which, of course, our heart is broken for these poor parents enduring it. But there's another side where we know we're being played by the state, that they have managed this story from beginning to end, and they are still managing it. And actually, all of those details were put into the public domain in open court by Mr. Justice Goose. We should, to a degree, be not necessarily describing them graphically. I don't think decent people do that anyway. But they're doing the same thing again, Nick. It's that chilling effect of don't talk about it in detail, isn't it?
Justice has to be seen to be done. There's no point having justice behind closed doors with secrets and, secret court appearances. Justice has to be seen to be done. And how we get that is having an open, honest criminal justice system where the general public can see what's going on and hear all the information and be told the information as if we're adults, as if we're sensible adults. But the elite, the police, the politicians don't trust us with information anymore, because every time they give us the information, we make the wrong choices, such as Brexit, such as some of these things we've voted for in the past.
Right, and they've got, according to them, got you, yes.
Yeah. So they've got to a stage now where, Jesus, don't tell the public anything because they're idiots, because they always make the wrong decisions. Well, they may think we make the wrong decisions, but that's only because they don't live our lives. we're sensible enough and clever enough to make the choices to improve our lives. They may disagree with those choices, but they haven't got the common sense to think that we've got a different opinion. It's all about keeping us down and keeping us under control. But let's jump to a different thing altogether in this case. I'd like to discuss the death penalty. I would like to discuss, because he's got 52 years in jail. It's not enough. I don't think justice has been served there.
They're saying he'll be 70 years old before he's eligible for parole.
Exactly. Not good enough for two reasons. First of all, that's not justice, and everybody knows that's not justice. And the more we crumble away our criminal justice system, the more likely people are to start taking the law into their own hands to administer justice. But the second point is, well, 2 points. The first thing is locking up 52 years is torture. It's not compassion. It's not kindness. We're torturing. I mean, even though he's a monster and a scumbag, do we want to torture him for 52 years? Or do we want to put him out of his misery, just like we do a rabid dog? Should we just not put him out of his misery? And the benefit is, let's save tens of millions of pounds, because that's what we're going to spend now. We're going to spend, at least £10 million now over the next 50 years on his prison, on keeping him fed, keeping him safe. It'd probably be more than that, because people want to kill him. So it's going to cost us a fortune. Isn't it the kindest, the most compassionate thing to put him out of his misery?
Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure where to start with that. But first of all, I take your point, and that is, in a situation where somebody has admitted they've been kind of caught red-handed to a certain degree, right? All of the stuff that he had at home. When I saw the images of what was going on in his house, I mean, I think there are big question marks that also have to be asked about his parents, which I hope we're going to get onto shortly. But the problem for me about the death penalty is that there are so many people in our system who are innocent and who have been convicted of murder, and there are a number of people that I believe there are unsafe convictions for, and you might not agree with me. For example, Lucy Letby and Jeremy Bamber, and there are many reasons to believe that those are unsafe convictions, as one example. So what do you do in a situation like that? Because we could literally be putting to sleep, for want of a better description, completely innocent people. How do we get around that if we reintroduce the death penalty?
We introduce a modern death penalty fit for the 21st century. We have lots of caveats. We have lots of levels they have to reach. So here's an example. How about we only have the death penalty for atrocities where the atrocity was caught on video or mobile phone, where there's at least 10 witnesses who can all identify the killer, where there's solid DNA evidence, and where the person pleads guilty. Well, that's 100% case. And then people will say, but the police, you can't trust police officers. And to a certain extent, we've seen police officers lie and corrupt cases in the past. So what we do there is we have an extra offence, that it's actually a capital offence for anybody to interfere with a capital punishment case. So any police officer who messes with the evidence would face the death penalty themselves for attempted murder and perverting the course of justice. So we would only have it in extreme cases where it is not beyond reasonable doubt, where it is 100%. Because you're right, because I don't want to go back to the days where 50 years later we find out we hung someone and they didn't do it.
Right.
But those days are gone. Technology has moved on. We've all got video phones, on us all the time.
World, and unfortunately, many of us have now seen him entering that dance studio. You can actually hear the music of Taylor Swift. It seems like just an ordinary Monday, doesn't it? And it's so devastating what has taken place. Really, it is. But there is all the interference. So I take your point there. I absolutely do. And many people here in the comments also take your point about kind of bringing it up to date in that kind of scenario. But there's so much political interference in this that I'm so deeply concerned that it's hiding something else. And as one example, MP Nick Timothy said he was prevented from asking when the PM and Home Secretary were informed about the rising, about the Al-Qaeda manual. He's tabled a written question for this Friday. But, I think this goes back to what you said at the start. And that is it they are concerned this is going to bring them down because a lot of the fingers will point back to them?
Absolutely. In that summer, when we had riots across the country and demonstrations, they could see the government falling. They could potentially see, the country falling, and they got scared, because we always We always think we're scared of the government, we're scared of the elite, and to a certain extent we are. But we should always remember the 70 million of us, and there's a couple of hundred of them sat in Parliament. They're terrified of us. We just don't realise the power we have and how fearful they are.
I think there's another side that we also have to look at, and it's not necessarily where I'm coming from, but it is where a lot of people are coming from, and I do have to represent that. You wrote a book called England, My England. It was about the death and resurrection, as you call it, of the greatest country to ever exist, and you feel that the problem is that English people have allowed this country to be taken from us, and we have to look at that to a certain degree, because Axel Rudakabana, although he was born in the UK, his father and his parents were from Rwanda. They'd come over during the genocide. And we have to question, we know that there is a sizable chunk of people in the UK who hate us. They hate our way of life. What do we do about that?
It has to be mass deportations. And I'm not talking about deporting everybody who's ever come to the country. Because my dad was an immigrant. So what do you do about people like me who are only half English? But we have invited people into our country who fit many different criteria. Some of them actually hate us and are planning the overthrow of the country. Others have come here because it was just simply better than where they were born. So they have no connection to this country. And if they can get to somewhere better, well, they would leave here and go there next as well, because they're just gypsies. They're just looking for the best deal they can get. And then you've got other people who come here and live in their little ghettos, and it's just a mini version of the country where they came from. And I say, no, that's good enough. We need integration, and then we need full assimilation, because this has happened before. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings invaded this country, took over half of England, and we had thousands of Vikings move here with a family and built farms. And over the next couple of centuries, everybody inbred, and then they became as English as anybody else. That's what we have to do with the immigrants who are here. I mean, there's at least 10 million we have to deport. And I don't mean us physically deporting them. No, on day one, I would like, if I became Prime Minister, day one, I would deport 10,000 foreign criminals in our jails. 12% of our jails are foreigners. Deport them. And then let's start making life harder for people we don't want in the country. Anybody who wasn't born here, I would give them a new tax code, which means they pay more tax than everybody else because they've got to pay in more. I would reduce services, public services that they could access to. Not necessarily NHS emergency care, because I wouldn't want anyone dying on the streets. No. But we need to say to people, you're not British. You're here to benefit the British by working, by paying taxes. You're a guest. I'd stop using the word immigrant, because immigrant implies you're here to stay. You're just a foreigner. I would use the word guest. You're here at our pleasure. And the second we don't want you here, you leave. And that's the mindset we need. We need to start. And we need to close the borders, basically.
I mean, there's so many people saying this now. I've always been very much involved in multiculturalism. That's why I moved to London. But I do understand, and I think it's important to take account of everybody's perspective on this, because clearly we have problems, like quite very serious problems that the government are not addressing. And not only that, Rachel Reeves was at WEF this week. I don't know if you saw her or heard her, but she's already talking about new processes to bring people from overseas to bring them in for work. And so obviously a big problem. Absolutely. Labour are absolutely at the forefront of this, but Conservatives were no better, even though they pretended to be. Is there anybody politically out there who actually cares about what's happening in the UK?
Oh, who knows? Who knows? I could try to name some, but do you know what? They'd probably let me down in the next couple of years.
I know.
Who knows who's out there? And that my book, England, My England, is about us individually taking personal responsibility for our country. That doesn't mean we're all going to run for parliament. It doesn't mean we're going to set up our own political parties and do demonstrations on the street. But the takeover of our country by us has to start somewhere. And it starts at the individual, and it starts with us taking personal responsibility, looking after our family, our community, and then our country. It's about speaking the truth and not being a coward anymore. And when people tell you that men can become women, you say, no, they can't. Stop being a coward and just nodding along in case you get into trouble. Right. It's about you speaking to your family and friends about things that are going on. It's about us going, the king is in the all together. Start pointing at what's going wrong in the country and going, look, That's not working, is it? And stop being afraid until, as individuals, as English men and English women, until we start doing this, then nothing will change. Because what we keep doing is we keep looking at our politicians to come and fix our problems for us.
Oh, goodness me. And they're creating them in the first place. Absolutely ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like asking the arsonist to put out the fire. Absolutely absurd. But of course, we cannot forget this male, this human being, right? I found his behavior absolutely egregious, because at the end of the day, we do have individual responsibility. And 18, 17, you know what you're doing. I hate the fact that he was just a few days away from his 18th birthday. And so he gets kind of like these cut cap tariffs. But there was so much going on in that house. His father, the week before, had stopped him from getting into a cab and apparently going to do a similar thing to a school. What role do you think, if any, should we be looking at now in terms of his parents? Surely they should be under some investigation.
I don't agree with visiting the sins of the father upon the son.
Not you?
Because children are not responsible for what their parents have ever done. That's unfair. But I do believe in visiting the sins of the children upon the parents, because parents raise children. Parents are responsible for children. Even when those children are adults, parents should always take an amount of responsibility, because they're their children. So we do need to look at the mother and father of this monster and say, what the hell did you do? Where did you go wrong? Why didn't you report this then at that time? And maybe it'll come out that they did everything right. Maybe they banged their heads against social services doors.
It's hard being a parent. It's not easy.
Of course it is. Of course it is. So maybe they did everything right, but maybe they didn't. And maybe we have to look at this family and go, do you know what? We gave you sanctuary in this country, and this is how your son repaid us, and we're going to deport all these back to Rwanda. And maybe that's unfair on that family, but maybe that's the message we need to send to the migrant community in this country, that you all need to do better. Because if you don't raise your children right, then we deport all of you in the family, because we're not willing to accept this. And maybe the children of migrants may be better citizens if they know that their responsibility for all their family lies on their shoulder. Personal responsibility.
We have to ask more of people, in the same way as I don't think any politician should get in power unless they've done some kind of psychological testing and actually worked out in the real world. We have to ask more of people, and we're failing to do that. But the other thing that greatly concerns me, and this is an absolute failure, is this individual was reported to prevent a number of occasions. Authorities had numerous opportunities to stop him, Nick, and they didn't. What's going wrong there?
First thing I have to say is every government department's incompetent. I spent a decade working in local government. Everything is run at a competent level. And the reason why is because everything's political. Prevent was created as a political tool because of terrorism. Prevent have spent the last 10 years being told, you're not getting enough referrals of white boys. We need more white referrals. We're referring people into Prevent now, especially white kids, if they're sexist.
Yeah, ridiculous. It's a terrorist program, which of course they said they're not going to label this terrorism, but I'm not. It doesn't make sense. Even the judge had some issues with that. In law, can't legally, because he's apparently not part of any one ideology or another. But if you're manufacturing ricing and you have a number of kind of terrorist manuals, he had IRA as well, by the way. But surely that is terrorism. He brought terrorism, and I think our failure to label things as they are is also contributing to the problem.
Prevent have got a very tight terms of reference. Right. And the reason it's a very tight terms of reference is because they never wanted to be flooded with young Islamic men being referred into Prevent, because they already knew 80% of people referred into Prevent are Muslims. They didn't want it to be 99.9%. So we have to remember why Prevent was set up. Prevent was set up so the government could say, look, we're doing something about terrorism. But at the same time, we don't want to be called racist or Islamophobic. So for God's sake, hamper Prevent from taking too many Muslim referrals into it. So it's been flooded with referrals that never should be referred to. They are also being criticised we need to be perfectly honest. We're never going to stop lunatics, every lunatic doing atrocities like this. We're never going to stop it.
Right.
And if we think we are, then that's why prevent is under so much scrutiny and is a political tool, because we think we can't. We should be able to reduce the numbers. Prevent should only be, no, there should be different levels of prevent about what they can do, but it's a political tool. And so therefore, they're not following the evidence, the referrals. It's all about, is this going to look good in the press? Are we going to be in trouble by MPs because it looks like we're Islamophobic? And that's part of the problem, political interference.
It is. And talking about political interference, what did you make of Keir Starmer coming out this week saying that describes Southport as a new threat? I'm sorry, as a journalist, this is not a new threat. What were your thoughts about that?
What he was told before he gave that speech was, Keir, for God's sake, don't use the term far right. Because every time you use that term far right, everyone laughs at us and you make things worse. So he's had to come up with a new bogeyman. And the bogeyman now is young men sat in their bedrooms on the internet. That's the new boogeyman. And it can include Muslim young men, far right young men, and he's had to come up with a new boogeyman to scare people with, because he doesn't want to use the term far right, because we all laugh in his face when he says the term far right.
Do you think there is an argument? And again, going back to what you said at the start, and I totally agree with you, and that is people who are setting fire to hotels and doing all egregious stuff like that. I'm not talking about them, but people being locked up for social media posts around this. Do you think there is an argument that they should now be released?
Never should have been sentenced, should be released right now. Will it happen? Absolutely not. This government is not for U-turning. This government, won't U-turn on anything. This government, it also knows it needs to make sure, well, it'll fail, but it needs to make sure we don't go back on the streets again at the next atrocity, because there's another atrocity coming, because there always is. So something will happen this year, and maybe people will want to go back on the streets and protest, and they'll go, oh, do I want 3 years in jail?
Right.
Oh, I best not.
Chilling effect,
he will release no one.
It's a terrible chilling effect, actually, on our freedom to assemble, our freedom to speak, all of these things. And it is deeply alarming. But, and I think that you alluded to this, and I want to bring it back to this, it seems absolutely clear to me that what they're going to do is, because obviously they use these atrocities in multiple ways for their agendas. We absolutely know they want to clamp down on social media. Our ability to gather on social media is, they were not prepared for that at all. So they're going to use this, aren't they, to clamp down on us on social media. And I got that impression from the Merseyside police when they were already telling us how we could and couldn't react to the atrocity.
It's all about control, isn't it? Because they know they cannot end the problems with radical Islam and our mental health epidemic and mass migration. They know they can't tackle any of that. They haven't got the backbone. They haven't got the intelligence. They haven't got the willpower, grit, determination to do anything about that. So therefore, what's the only option? The only option is to control the public. This is what every dictator and an authoritarian state always does. And we're well along that path now, because we have political prisoners, and now they're going to clamp, and they've been clamping down on free speech for decades. The Tories as well. Tories and Labour just as bad as each other on this, but they have to control the people. But we see this all the time before dictators fall. They always become worse, and that's what Keir Starmer is doing now. No, it's clamping down more. He's taking rights away. He's clamping down on free speech. You cannot control the internet. It's too big. It's too vast. It's too complicated. They can attempt to do it, but they will fail. Just like the church tried to clamp down on the printing press in the 17th century. They can't do it. It'll all go underground. And it'll get worse if it goes underground.
It really will. We have to be absolutely aware of what's taking place. We really do. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Nick. We truly appreciate it. Obviously, nothing we can do can bring back these poor little girls and the horror that some of these people are going to have to live with for the rest of their lives. But what we need to do is do everything we can to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. And as you say, we're surrounded by people. There are unsteady people, and these are people who are born here, people who are coming in. So, but we need better protection. We absolutely do. Nick, before you leave, what is a parting shot you'd like people to know?
Personal responsibility. Stop looking at other people to fix our problems as a country. Stop thinking voting for a party or an individual is going to solve the problems. They're going to be part of the solution, but we keep giving our rights and responsibilities as English men and women. We keep giving them away to other people who we think are better than us. You're English. No one's better than you. Of course, we need leaders to govern us and pull things together, but stop giving all your responsibility to other people. Take responsibility. Start fixing your lives and your family and your community. And if 70 million people did that, God, this country would improve fast.
Different world, right? If people started taking care of their own backyard instead of looking at their neighbours. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, everybody. This is Nick Buckley. Take good care of yourself, Nick. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's time to wake up with Sonia Poulton.